right, this is the review for business law, chapters 11, 12, 21, 25, and 30. Those 5 chapters in the book. 11 and 12 are the last 2 chapters about contracts. Chapter 21 is about agency, if you remember. Chapter 25 is about marriage. And 30 is about credit. Okay? So, there are 60 questions total on the test. And we'll take it next time. If it were me, I would listen carefully to the review. I would not go to sleep. I would try to focus for the entire review. And then I would spend some time in the book looking over the 5 chapters.
Are there any essays?
There will be no essays on the test. It's just true and false and multiple choice and some fill in the blank. Okay? Any questions about that?
No.
There is a review on my website, canesworld.org. You can go there and listen to that review, and by listening to this review today and maybe the other review, you should be thoroughly prepared for the test. Okay? All right. What's the best way once you make a payment, once you buy something with a credit card, what's the most economical way to pay for that?
Then you have to pay for it with the credit card.
You've bought it with a credit card. What kind of payments should you make to your credit card?
The maximum?
Minimum. Before the grace period ends.
You should pay as much as you possibly can. That's the maximum. If you make just the minimum payment, then you will be paying a substantial more. I can't even speak English. Substantially more for that product, right? Because you will be paying all that interest. Josh is right. There is a credit card grace period that if you pay off your credit card at the end of every month, if you have a grace period, then you will pay no interest for using your credit card. That would be by far the most economical way to do it. Okay? Let's see. What's proxy marriage?
When you stand in for somebody else, like you're...
Is it legal?
Yes.
It is legal. You are allowed legally to send someone to stand in for you. In fact, if you think about it, if they stand in for you like that in what's called a proxy marriage, then what are they actually becoming for you? What? An agent, that's correct. Chapter 25 and Chapter 21 kind of interrelate. You could give them your power of attorney, and they could stand in for you as your agent. That's exactly right. What's vicarious liability mean? Vicarious liability. If you remember in the area of agency, vicarious liability is being responsible for someone else. Vicarious means someone else. So if an employer, for example, an employer has responsibility for their employees vicariously. And generally speaking, like remember in my pizza place, I didn't want to have pizza delivery guys driving all over town because I become responsible for their driving. Generally speaking, they are limited. My liability is limited to negligence. Meaning if Brandon works for me, driving a pizza place, if he runs over somebody by accident just because he's being negligent, then I am responsible. If he's running over his girlfriend's father on purpose because he wants her to break up with him, then I'm not responsible for that, even if he uses my pizza truck to do it. Okay? Not intentional. Intentional torts are his responsibility. Torts of negligence could easily be mine under the doctrine of vicarious liability. Okay? Tell me different kinds of agents. Who's an agent?
Somebody represents you.
Somebody who represents you. So, for example, remember the different relationships? We have the agent and principal. That's where I hire somebody. I hire a real estate agent, or I hire a travel agent, or I hire an attorney to represent me. I am the principal. They are the agent. What other type of relationship have we discussed?
Agent's agent.
Well, we've talked about agent's agent and sub-agents. That's correct. The other major one that we talked about was the employee-employer relationship. Again, employees are agents for the employer. Remember the doctrine of respondent superior? The employer is the superior, and they have the right to respond, and that doctrine means that there is vicarious liability involved. Okay?
Isn't there like an employer-servant relationship too?
Say that again?
An employer-servant relationship? Is that master-servant?
Master-servant relationship is another name for the employer-employee relationship. You're right. Then we got in that whole discussion about independent contractors and how employers try to call their employees independent contractors so that they can avoid or escape the vicarious liability issue. Okay? How are agency relationships created? Normally, they are created by hiring somebody to be your agent. That's the most common. But sometimes agency relationships are created by law. There are some circumstances where an agency relationship is just created by law, automatically. Okay? Let's see. Certain contracts have to be in writing to be legal. Give me a couple of examples of contracts that must be in writing. Well, let me ask you this before I even answer that. What law requires certain contracts to be in writing? The statute of frauds is the body of law that determines what contracts must be in writing and which ones don't have to be.
What was it? Statute of what?
Statute of frauds. They say some contracts are so complicated, or they're so big, or they're so important that without them being in writing we would have a lot more lawsuits. So these kinds of contracts have to be in writing. Some of the contracts that must be in writing would include contracts that take over a year to complete. Our memories get a little hazy over time. We may not remember exactly what we agreed to if we don't put it in writing. Real estate contracts have to be in writing to be enforceable in court. That's because they're complicated and they are for a lot of money. Contracts for over the sale of goods over $500 must be in writing. Contracts dealing with the debts of others. If you are accepting somebody else's debt, I need it in writing in order for it to be valid. Okay? Those are some of them. But does the writing have to be, does it have to be a formal contract? The answer is no. The writing could be on a napkin at a restaurant. We could write up the terms of an agreement on a piece of toilet paper, and it would be legal. It may not last very long, but it would be legal. Okay? Let's see. What's public policy mean? What's the doctrine of public policy? Public policy states that the government has the right to legislate and control our society and economic situation. So for example, the idea of them coming in and taking your home, the government can do that under public policy. It's called eminent domain. They have the right to take your property if they need to for an off-ramp on the freeway or for some other reason. Okay? Public policy. What's price fixing mean?
When two companies get together and set the price high, so they'll both get like.
Okay. It is illegal for gas stations across from each other to talk about, let's raise our prices. It's against the law. That's called price fixing. Now, normally when you drive by, you see gas prices and they're across the street from each other, they're the same. Well, one guy changes his price, the other guy runs out and changes his. That's not against the law. But if they conspire together to change the price, then it is. That's called price fixing. Let's see what else there is. What happens in the case of an illegal contract? What happens if a contract is illegal? What will the judge do? It's a void contract, you're right. So the judge will generally do nothing. So if there are two parties to a contract and both of them are equally responsible, the judge doesn't get involved in illegal contracts, generally. If it's drug related or something like that, then the judge will just have people arrested. Don't go into court with an illegal contract and try to sue somebody. It's kind of dumb. Let's see, under common law, tell me about blue laws, blue sky laws. What's blue law? Blue laws are contracts that are made on Sunday. Now, under common law, back in England, it was legal to make a contract on Sunday. And then in our country, because of our Christian background and all that, they actually passed some laws making it illegal to enter into contracts on Sunday. Okay? Those are not generally enforced these days. All right, let's see. If a contract runs contrary to public policy, is it illegal? The answer is no. There are a lot of contracts that may not be technically illegal, but that they do interfere with public policy. Another way contracts interfere with public policy is if you mess around with competition. The government of the United States encourages competition. They like competition, they want it, they insist on competition. That's why they break up monopolies. But it doesn't mean necessarily that a contract is illegal just because it goes against public policy. Those two don't go together. All right. What's another name for Sunday statutes? Blue laws. Blue laws, that's right. Let's see. We know about price fixing already. What is it called when we charge more than the legal maximum limit in interest? Usury is the word. Usury. You do want to review terminology in these 5 chapters, okay? Usury.
What's the definition for usury?
Charging more than the legal maximum. Like Visa in Utah can only charge 19.6%. Unless that you have a Visa card and you have paid late. If you have paid late, then you get put in the high risk category and they can raise your interest rate to 35 or 40%. I don't know what the maximum is, but they can't charge you 300% a year. That's against the law. Okay? All right. Let's see. What do we call land and property that's attached to the land? Real property is the answer. You only have 2 types of property, sort of. You have real property and you have personal property. There is one other kind of property, it's called intellectual property, like ideas. But if I have a swing set, just for fun, if I install a swing set in my backyard, and you know the kind of swing set you swing on and the legs go up and it's kind of a dangerous situation. If it just sits on the land, then it's personal property. If I cement the legs of the swing set into the ground, then it becomes real property. Anyway, let's see. What is goodwill? In legal terms or in business terms, what is goodwill? Goodwill is the loyalty of customers and your reputation. That's what goodwill is. Okay? Loyalty. They call it patronage. There are some people who will always go to Lehigh Bakery for their donuts because they love to shop. They're loyal to this. It's not necessarily they're the best, but they are they want to shop locally. Okay? What will the court do if part of a contract is legal and part of the contract is illegal? What will the court generally do? We'll go.
Just accept the legal parts of the contract.
Okay, sometimes the court will try to separate the legal issues from the illegal ones, and then they will rule on the legal portions of the contract. That's correct. Is an illegal contract void or voidable? It's void. Yeah, an illegal contract is void. Okay. Let's see. how does the government buy things? What's the process that they use to buy and purchase items? Anybody know? We talked about it. Remember we talked about the I-15 project and how when they have to get bids. It's called competitive bidding. They are required. At school here, if I want to buy something that's more than $500, I have to get a competitive bid. I have to get 3 quotes before I can decide, because they don't want me awarding a friend of mine the contract for larger items. Competitive bidding, government uses it all the time. If you do anything to destroy the competitive bidding process, if you try to undermine it by getting together and making a secret deal, you are running contrary to public policy. That's against the law. Okay? That's another type of price fixing. Let's see. You become a medical doctor. You get a document stating that you have permission to perform surgeries in Utah. What do we call that document?
A license?
It's a license, that's right. A license is a legal document verifying that you have permission to do something. I do not have the right to perform surgery on you, even though I'd like to. I don't have that right, unless I had a doctor's license. I don't have the right to pierce your ears, because that does require a license. Yeah,
Could I sue Tawny?
you could.
You think she asked her to do it?
Tawny does not have the legal right to do it, even if, I don't know who could sue each
I'd
other.
never do
No, that's on
that.
the
I know.
camera for everyone to see.
There you go. Let's see, what's the big law that was passed to protect consumers from unfair financing arrangements? This is the law that's a big deal, and all the people that lend money have to comply with this law and tell the borrowers exactly how much it's costing them. It's Regulation Z, a part of what law? Truth in Lending. Truth in Lending Law Act, and Regulation Z is part of that. Okay?
Who does it protect?
Consumers from unfair lending practices. There are 2 types of licenses, if you remember. One is to show competence, like a medical doctor or an attorney or a dentist or something like that. They all need to be properly licensed. The other kind of license is not to show competence. What is that for?
Like selling things in business.
To raise revenue. Like a business license in Lehigh. If I could open up a business, and they are not going to ask, I don't have to prove to them that I'm competent. I can just open up a business, and I have to pay a business license. The purpose of the business license is for them to raise revenue. Plus, they would say also that they are controlling the marketplace, and they're getting involved and making sure we're not illegal or something. But the main purpose of them is to raise revenue. Now remember, that's treated differently. If I make a contract with you and you are not properly licensed, my contract with you is still binding, as long as that license does not need to be had for competence. If I make a contract with a doctor who isn't properly licensed, then that contract is not binding. I think we used an example of a tree cutter, right, or something like that, remember? If I hired you to cut my trees down and you weren't licensed, the contract is still binding under that circumstance. Does that make sense? All right. What's a restrictive covenant? A restrictive covenant. Anyone? Restrictive covenant is, well, a good example of it, most common example, is if I'm selling a business. Under that situation, they have the right to say to me, I do not want you competing with me. And there would be a restrictive covenant in our contract, and that's legal in that case. Generally, it's not illegal for somebody to try to destroy competition, but in this case it is, using the restrictive covenant. They don't want me selling my pizza place and only to open up a new pizza place across the street and become competition with them. However, restrictive covenants have to be reasonable. They can't say legally that you can never own another pizza place anywhere in the world for the next 50 years. That's not reasonable. Most of the times they say within 10 miles, or they say within 3 years, or something like that. Okay? That's reasonable. Let's see. I think that's it.
That's it?
No.
Oh,
For that page.
oh.
Sorry. Let's see. Are there any exceptions to the rule about real estate contracts needing to be in writing? I realize that, remember we talked about that, but that feels like a long time ago, doesn't it? So if I were you, I'd probably spend a little more time in chapters 11 and 12 than I would in chapters 30 and 25. But that's just me. There is an exception, and that was, if you'll remember, it's called equitable estoppel. Equitable estoppel. The judge does have the right, under the doctrine of equitable estoppel, to enforce a contract even though it may not be technically legal because it's not in writing. If you changed your life, remember a girl went to college and the uncle was going to pay for college, and then he changed his mind after she went into a whole bunch of debt. And the judge could say, wait a minute, that's not fair, that's not equal, that's not fair at all, so I'm going to force you to pay it. Even though it should have been in writing, I can force you under the doctrine of equitable estoppel.
So
Okay.
it's just enforcing something someone said?
Yes, they would sometimes enforce a verbal contract even though technically it should have been in writing. Let's see. If you and I enter into a contract and you do not perform, what do we call that? What have you done? What's the word we use? You have breached the contract, breached it. Okay? It's a breach of contract. Remember this too. You and I negotiate something back and forth for 2 weeks, and then we finally agree on a price, agree on our terms, and we write it up in contract. And then 3 months later you sue me because something was said, so I agreed to something before the contract was signed, but it's not in the contract. Am I going to be responsible for what was said if it's not in the contract? What's the rule that determines that?
Is it like anything you say can...
Be used against you in a court of... No, that's something else.
No, it's like anything you say, it goes over like what you've written down.
It's the other way around.
Okay.
The written part supersedes any verbal promises. If anybody ever makes you a verbal promise, and then you sit down and write a contract, you make sure that that verbal promise is in the contract, because that's the parole evidence rule. The parole evidence rule. If you're buying a car and they promise you to change your oil for the first 2 years, 3 times a year, or whatever, make sure you get that in writing. Otherwise, legally, they're not going to be required to do that. You'd have a hard time suing them if it's not written in the contract. All right, what do we call a contract that's in the process of being fulfilled? You go up to Del Taco, you order 3 tacos. They say, okay, that'll be $12. $12. That'll be $4. You pay the $4, and then they go make the 3 tacos. While they're making the tacos, what condition is that contract in? What phase is it in? It's in the executory phase. Executory. It's not executed because they haven't handed you the tacos yet. It's accusatory. God. Anyway, you got the point. All right. Let's see. So what are the body of law that requires contracts to be in writing? Michaela, you want to focus on what I'm talking about here, please. Okay? Put away that stuff. Statute of frauds. Remember, the statute of frauds requires certain contracts to be in writing. What is the statutes that require certain lawsuits to take place within a certain period of time? I can't sue somebody for something that happened 25 years ago. Statute of limitations, yeah, is the one that determines that. All right. Who handles a deceased person's estate? I will chat with you
Their agent?
soon. Oh, no, the person is called, it's somebody else. It's a very specific person's name. Somebody who handles the estate for someone who has just passed away.
Do you have
My other computer is right there in the bag,
black bag?
the black bag. It's the executor. Mr. Naylor was correct. The executor is the person who handles the estate for a deceased person. What do we call it when a clause in a contract can be interpreted in multiple ways? Wrong. It's
That
not
is
the.
correct.
What do we call it when a clause can be interpreted different ways? Ambiguous. It's an ambiguous clause, and people write contracts to avoid ambiguity. We do not want clauses to be ambiguous. We want them to be very clear. Okay? And you remember if there is an ambiguous clause, then the person that wrote the clause is responsible for it, and generally the judge will side with the other party. All right, I gotta pick up the speed here. What do we call it when both parties agree to a contract? We call that consensual. It's consensual. Another question about vicarious liability. Vicarious liability is based on the principle of respondent superior. The only reason I'm responsible for your actions is because I am the superior, and I have to respond because I am in the superior position as your employer. Okay? What's agency by circumstance? What's another name for agency by circumstance? This is where the law comes in and says there is an agency relationship here automatically.
Isn't it like a sub-agent? Or an
No, it's called agency by estoppel. It's that funny word, estoppel again. There are certain circumstances that require an agency relationship to exist. Remember what an agency relationship is if you're my agent, you have a fiduciary responsibility. And you better take that seriously. The law doesn't like it when you don't take your responsibility seriously. You have to represent me to the best of your ability. Yeah.
Do you have to know what a fiduciary responsibility is?
No. All right. If I ask you to do something for me, do you become my agent?
No.
Do I have to pay you? No. That's called, what's that called? If you do me a favor, pick up my mail for me. That's called a gratuitous agent. A gratuitous, meaning you're doing it for free. You know what an independent contractor is? It's one who I hire to work, but he does not become my employee. I am therefore not responsible for any injury that he might cause. Okay? Let's see. I hire you as my agent, and you go negotiate with somebody to buy a property for me. What is that other person called? To our agency relationship, that other person is called the third party. Third party. Yeah. A subagent is something else. A subagent is when I give you permission to hire another agent to work for you, and I'm now giving you authority to do that. That's called a subagent. They actually become my subagent. If you go out and hire another agent to do something and I don't know about it, that's called an agent's agent. That's a little bit different legally, how that works. Let's see. I hire you to deliver pizza for me. You're driving my delivery truck. I am therefore vicariously liable because I am the respondent superior. But when you get into that accident, in order for me to be responsible, you have to be what? You have to be doing something within what?
Be negligent?
He has to be negligent, first of all. He has to be working. We call that the scope of employment. It has to be within the scope of employment. He has to be delivering pizza for me. Just because he's driving my truck, if he's driving it over the weekend, that doesn't, then I'm not responsible. Okay? Let's see. Remember the employer, what's the employer called in the agency relationship? The master. And the employee is called the servant. That's correct. Let's see. If an agency relationship is created by law, what is the agent called? It's called a statutory agent. A statutory agent. An agent created by statute, which is law. Okay? What do we call a piece of paper, a formal writing that gives you authority to act on my behalf? We call that the power of attorney. Power of attorney. Attorneys, by very nature, are agents. But I can give a non-attorney my power of attorney. So they can act for me and they can sign documents for me. Okay? What do we call a marriage where there was no ceremony?
Common law.
Common law marriage. And we talked about that and you remember that. There are certain marriages that are against the law or prohibited. What law prohibits those kinds of marriages? Like marrying, remember consanguinity and affinity by blood or by marriage? There are certain, you can't marry anybody you want to sometimes. What law states that? It's called the Uniform Marriage and Divorce Act. The Uniform Marriage and Divorce Act determines that. Okay? What do we call an agreement that before two people get married, determining how they're going to deal with something if they get divorced? Premarital or prenuptial agreement. Okay? Back in common law, remember, I know I'm going quickly, but I'm running out of time here, guys. So under common law, back in England, before you get married, you had to publish the notices that you were getting married. What were those called? They're called marriage bans, B-A-N-S, bans. They were to notify the world that somebody was changing their legal position. If you're related to somebody by blood, what do we call that? Consanguinity. Right, consanguinity means you're related, brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, okay? As opposed to stepbrothers. Stepbrothers are related by affinity, not consanguinity. Okay? All right, we already talked about proxy marriage. Another question about that. You go to the bank and borrow money, and they attach your tractor to the loan. What do we call that tractor? Collateral. It's you pledge some property as security for the debt. That's the terminology they use. That tractor is security for the debt. Okay? Let's see. What is the act that protects or helps consumers who receive bills for charges that they dispute? There's nothing more frustrating, by the way, than getting a big bill for something and you didn't charge it. You didn't buy that thing, and so but they're saying yes, you did. You owe us $850. What is that? What is the law called? It's called the Fair Credit Billing Act, and there are certain criteria that you have to go through, and there are certain things that the company has to go through legally. Okay, what are you responsible for if somebody steals your credit card? How much? $50. $50 is the maximum you might have to pay, and in my experience, you don't even have to pay that usually. I don't think I've ever been charged the $50. Okay. Let's see. What do you call the person that buys items using credit? What's that person called? The debtor, right? The debtor, T-O-R, D-E-B-T-O-R. See, in most states, how old do you have to be before you can get married without any agree? Yeah, you don't need parent permission. Once you're 18, you can do what you want. They may not be happy, but they can't stop you. If a person has more than 3 spouses, what are they called?
Polygamy.
That's polygamy. If they have 2 spouses,
Bilomy.
bigamy. Yeah,
Bi.
be careful. No,
Bye.
it's bigamy. Let's see. Why was it popular, and why in some places do you still have to get a blood test to get married? What are they looking for generally? Contagious diseases mostly. Contagious diseases, yeah. All right. A few more questions and we're done. Let's see. Tell me about bankruptcy. For personal bankruptcy, what are the 2 chapters?
Chapter 11, chapter 7, no, chapter 13.
Chapter 13 and chapter 7. Chapter 13 is called reorganization. Chapter 7 is called liquidation, right? Let's see. 13 and chapter 7. In businesses, that's chapter 11 and chapter 7. Chapter 7 in both cases for liquidation. Let's see. This is hard. A written notice that a security interest exists is a financing statement. I'll just tell you that right now. Financing statement is a written notice that a security, meaning a security interest means that somebody owes you money. The financing statement. Charge accounts. What kind of credit is that? Is that open-ended or closed-ended?
Closed.
Open-ended. Credit account, charge accounts are example of open-ended credit because they don't automatically mature. They go forever, as long as you keep the account open. Okay? The official name for Chapter 7, you better put this down, the official name for Chapter 7 bankruptcy judgment is the order for relief. The order for relief is what the judge issues, saying we are going to liquidate you. Sounds bad, doesn't it? Let's see. Give me an example of a closed-ended loan.
A mortgage.
A what?
A mortgage.
A mortgage or a car loan. Both of those have a maturity date. Those are closed-ended. Okay? Also, credit that's extended for a specific amount. They say, we will lend you $12,000. That is a closed-ended loan also. See, a credit card is not for a specific amount. They say you can borrow up to $5,000 or $20,000 or whatever, but you don't have to borrow that much. So, and what are the 5 things we look for in all credit cards? A low interest rate, a high credit limit, no annual fee, a grace period, everybody know what a grace period is, right? And perks, free things that come along with using the credit card.
And what are those again?
Yeah.
A low interest rate, a high credit limit, no annual fee, a grace period, and freebies or perks. And that's the review for the test. Please use this review along with the review on my website, along with going through the chapters and looking at mostly the vocabulary. Yeah.
Okay, so the written notice that there's security interest is financing.
A financing statement is the written notice.